Welcome to the Real Marriage Podcast with Mark and Grace Driscoll. Here we are talking about real marriage.
That sounded very professional.
Yeah.
It was a little more formal. Yeah, we'll just change subject. So here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to do a couple-part series on infidelity in marriage. What constitutes infidelity, what causes infidelity, how to safeguard against infidelity. Okay, so this comes from the Institute for Family Studies.
You mean infidelity doesn't just happen overnight? There's like things you can do to...
Well, you can do infidelity during the day. Yeah. Just pointing out.
Okay.
All right, so the Institute for Family Studies, a great organization if you want to just get the most recent data about marriage and sex and family. It really is outstanding. And if you're a pastor, leader, teacher, could be very helpful. But they had an article that came out a little while ago and a full research brief. They did a study of about 2,000 Americans, some single, some married. Here was the question: what counts as quote unquote cheating in marriage, emotional infidelity in a national sample? So you want to kind of set up the debate, the question, the discussion. Well, let's start with the obvious. What is obvious qualification counts for infidelity?
Sex with someone other than your spouse.
Okay, so sex with someone other than your spouse. The Bible calls that adultery. If you're new to Team Jesus, it's one of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery. In the Old Testament, if you committed adultery, it was possible that they could even kill you. So that probably reduced the recidivism rate noticeably.
Not a bad idea.
And in the New Testament, it is one of the potential grounds for divorce. And so you don't have to get a divorce if there is adultery, but it is such a big deal that it's, and Christians are going to argue and debate over what is permissible for divorce and not divorce. This is the one that is the most obvious, and it's the most...
Because it breaks a covenant with God and your spouse.
Yes.
And the marriage is a covenant that is outlined by God very clearly in the Bible between one man and one woman. It started with Adam and Eve, and we are to stay true to that covenant and keep that covenant pure, to keep the marriage bed pure.
It's Hebrews, yeah.
And when we don't, it violates God's commands and intent for us, and it violates our spouse in a very real, just damaging way.
Well, and I'm happy to report that we have nothing to report. We've been faithfully married since August 15th, 1992.
Yep.
You guys, you got to remember your anniversary. And March 12th, 1988 was our first date. And I'll share a story. So some years ago, we lived in a house that had a vine that grew up over the front of the garage, and then it went over a porch, and it turned into this trellis, and it was lots of vines, really pretty and nice, and it took forever to grow. And yours truly screwed up. I was out weed whacking, and I got too close to the bottom, toward the root of the vine, and I screwed up, and I sheared the thing off. And terrible. I came and told you, I was like, I'm an idiot. I should have just, I should have not tried to get so close and be so nuanced. I mean, obviously I'm not good at subtlety, so I screwed that up. And then eventually, it just took a little while. The vine that was over, the trellis of vine that was over the porch area just started to wither, and eventually it died. Adultery does to the marriage what I did to the vine. It severs it, and the marriage doesn't immediately die. It begins to wither, and it begins to die. And so adultery is that kind of thing, spiritually, emotionally, physically. Now, it doesn't mean, if this is you, that all hope is lost. There is grace. God can forgive. God can heal. But then what you're going to need to do, you're going to need to water and nourish and protect that bud so that it grows back into a vine. You're earning trust and rebuilding relationship over time. So sexual sin obviously qualifies as adultery, as affair. But you want to tell them the little survey. Here's the question then is, what else qualifies?
Emotional. The question was, does emotional infidelity count as infidelity? So if your heart is leaning toward someone emotionally, but you haven't crossed the sexual, physical line, does it still count as infidelity? And the stats here out of 2,000 U.S. adults, 76% felt that a married person having a secret emotional relationship in real life constituted infidelity. 72% of the participants said that an online secret emotional relationship would also constitute infidelity. So 76% said it is if it's in real life. 72% says it is infidelity if it's online secret.
So do you think that number is surprising? And if so, is it surprisingly high or surprisingly low?
I mean, I'm glad it's that high. I guess maybe I was a little surprised, but I'm also surprised that it's not 100%. Because how would it not be infidelity if someone's heart is leaning towards someone else and you're married? How is that not infidelity? I mean, the Bible calls that adultery of the heart. So there is a name for it in the Bible.
So Jesus talks about committing adultery, not just of your hands, but of your heart. And that's lust, and that's inappropriate emotional connection with someone other than your spouse.
Starting something that you can't continue if you're married as well. And so don't get started because it only leads to the other.
Well, and that's the issue. Most physical affairs start with an emotional affair. You cross emotional boundaries before you cross physical boundaries.
Especially women. Men can cross over into the sexual more easily.
So statistically, well, what's interesting as well, then it says the numbers were even higher among married individuals. So that was among married and single. 80% of marrieds felt that a secret emotional relationship in real life was unfaithful, and 76% said that a secret emotional relationship online would be cheating, even without sexual engagement. And so when you're single, you're like, hey, infidelity includes emotional. And when you get married, you're like, actually, now it's more intense and the odds are higher. That's how you're going to see it. Let me ask you this, honey. Emotionally, what would it do? And there's nothing, I have never done this. I don't slide into my DMs. I don't direct message women. I don't meet with women alone. I don't have direct lines of communication with women. Like I'm a very firm, hard boundaries guy. And like, if the line is dangerous right here, I want to live 10 miles behind the line. I don't want to dance on the line. I've had male assistants often when I was in my traveling years. I had male assistants so that I wasn't traveling alone. And, just to me, like, you got nothing to hide, just make sure you keep short accounts.
Yeah. And if you had female assistants a couple of times, I knew them. They were my friends. And so,
well, and we meet together and they're our assistant and I don't travel with them. And and so, but as a wife, what would it do if you found out that there was some woman that became my quote unquote work spouse, which means I go to work and we're talking and having lunch together and connecting or, communicating outside of work, personal things, or I was talking about our marriage or our relationship, or if I had a woman at church that I got very close to and we were sharing prayer requests and maybe we were meeting for coffee once a month, just to pray for each other. Or, I was online and found, people maybe some girls I used to go to school with, got back into contact with them and was communicating and didn't tell you. I mean, what would that do for you?
It would break trust that we've worked hard to build.
Yeah.
You'd be done.
Oh, crap. Shots fired here at the Real Marriage Podcast.
No, it does. It breaks because your whole marriage, you're working at loving one another, which means building trust with one another so that you can enjoy each other and have freedom with one another. And if you do something, if one person does something like that in the marriage, it takes you back to zero or less because you don't all of a sudden have trust that you thought you had with the person, with your heart, with your words, with your actions, sexually, emotionally. It breaks every thread of trust. And it is hard work to stay healthy and happy and thriving in your marriage. And so then to take it and just dismiss it like it's nothing is just, it's heart-wrenching. And we've walked couples through this. And so we've seen it through their eyes. And it is brutal. It is a very hard thing to patch and forgive and move forward. And so, yeah.
And just for those of you that want a little biblical foundation, thou shalt not commit adultery, one of the 10 commandments. Pastor Mark here, kicking off the New Testament book of Hebrews, where we take an Acts 2 shallow Christianity. We're going to spend about 6 months in this amazing book of the Bible, one of the least taught books in the entire New Testament, explaining all of the Old Testament, connecting it to the person and work of Jesus Christ. I want you to get the most out of it, so go ahead and head over to realfaith.com/shallow. I've got a study guide for you. In addition to the sermons, this will help you unpack this amazing, epic book of the Bible and go deep with God this year. In addition, Job 31:1, he said, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look upon a woman lustfully. And, he's talking about lusting, in your heart, to quote Jesus, before you do so with your hands, don't even go that direction. Qualifications of a church leader in the New Testament, supposed to set an example for everyone else, is the husband of one wife. And that literally in the Greek means a one-woman man. Not only does he have one wife, he acts like he only has one wife.
That's right. Yeah, there's no question that he has one wife.
Like, well, because sometimes you're around people and they're married and they're around somebody else. You're like, if I didn't know better, I'd think you guys were dating or a couple. Just the warmth, and you're like, you guys are a little too comfortable around each other. It's a little weird. And as you said, Jesus talks about adultery of the heart. And so, and for me, a big portion of our teaching for years on marriage has been that marriage has to include friendship. I think it's Song of Song 5:16, the second half of the verse. She says, he is my lover, he is my friend, talking about her husband. To me, emotional adultery, it is treacherous betrayal, because what it means is you have a private, secret, emotional connection and friendship with someone other than me that you're hiding from me that I don't know about. And to me, the friendship is for both of us, like, it's a massive part of marriage. Like, we're friends. We do everything together. We do life together. You're my friend. If I can't trust my friend, if I don't know my friend, that's disastrous, just on the friendship level.
Yes.
And so if you're out there and you're like, well, there's somebody my spouse doesn't know about, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Well, it's at work and it doesn't, no. They need to know. Because if you're hiding something, you're probably sinning, or at least sinning in your heart.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. For a woman, what is more likely, an emotional affair or a physical affair?
Emotional.
And see, as a guy, I'm like, I don't even understand that. Like, as a guy, I don't understand this. We talk a lot, we visit a lot, we cry a lot, we watch Lifetime movies, we go out to coffee, but we don't do anything. To me, that's first of all, I think all those guys are liars. Or they really stink at seducing a woman. And it's not because they're godly, it's just because they can't execute. To me, there's no reason to have a deep emotional relationship with a woman as a man unless it's going to end up in some physical relationship. That's just a man, and I know it sounds crass. It's not. It's just guy. So men are more likely to just have, than women, according to the research, a physical affair, meaning I didn't like her, wasn't connected to her, don't even know her, but I slept with her. For most women, that's not how it works. So how is the emotional affair for a woman, how could that be more treacherous than a physical affair? And how could it lead to a physical affair? For a woman to have an emotional affair.
Because a woman wants to feel in all her relationships, really, so it just would include this, she wants to feel an emotional connection with people. And so that's where it starts. And sometimes women are naive, not that it's right. Sometimes they're manipulative or seductive. And sometimes they think that it's just a friendship, and then they realize it's going somewhere other than that. They're starting to feel more about it than just a friendship. And so women get themselves caught in this web, but it's so destructive to even start to go there. And if you can tell that a man is even trying to go there with you and you're married and he's not your husband, you need to make boundaries quickly, or you can get away from that relationship, do that. But if it's someone at work and you think that they're coming towards you, you need to put that wall up so that they see very clearly you're not interested and you're married and you love your husband. And even if you're having hard times, you need to work on your marriage because that's your covenant. And that's what God will bring the joy into your marriage as you're faithful in walking out that covenant with each other. And so, yeah, it's probably more of a thing even with, the more women that are getting into the workforce over the decades and the more women that are getting into, the higher office positions and the executive positions.
Having to travel for business with male coworkers and being on the road and in the hotel and out to dinner and at the airport. It's all this casual time.
Yeah. I had to do this when we were newly married, and it was right before we had kids, and I worked in the executive world in advertising, and I had to draw those boundaries early on and make sure I was always talking about you and how we...
When I would come by.
Yeah.
I mean, people at work knew me. Now, obviously, at the church, everybody knows us and knows you. But yeah, put us in context of a married couple.
Yeah, and I could have advanced in my career had I gone and done all these trips and these, dinners out with the other executives, and it could have launched me into a whole career, I'm sure. But for me, my eyes were on my husband and my eyes were on God's plan for my life, which I knew was going to include children someday, and I wanted to be home with them. And so for me, that was my conviction, every decision I made in relationships, especially with someone at the workplace that was an opposite gender, that was on my mind all the time. I'm not available. I'm not going to be available. This is a temporary position. I don't need to go high in the ranks because my goal is to get home with my kids someday. And so that was always on my mind, and that kept me clear.
Well, and at the end, when you did come home and we started having what would be 5 fantastic kids, you were given an offer that would put you on a private jet with the president of the company, traveling around to do marketing pitches and business meetings around the country. And I was like, hell no, no, I'm not taking my young, beautiful wife and putting her on a plane with wealthy, older male executives to go stay in hotels and go out to dinner. And be like, well, it's just work and you're jealous. Damn straight I'm jealous.
No, you didn't have to say that because I didn't want to do it. It feels, in the moment, it can feel like, wow, that's quite an honor. But then when you start to assess all the taking away of the relationship that it would do and the taking away of what I knew God was having need.
Well, I just don't trust dirty old rich men. Period. I just don't.
It wasn't a temptation because God clearly put things in my mind that he had planned for me. But I think it's so easy to think, oh, well, that could be fun for a season and that would be really nice. And that's so honoring that they see my gifts and my abilities and wow, I could make a lot of money and we could save for a house. There's a lot of things that in a moment with something like that can be enticing. But if you think about it in relationship to your marriage and the future of your marriage and the future that God has for you, you really have to take those things into consideration because that could have been a stepping off into the type of life that would have led to something tragic. I believe it, is a stepping stone into that.
Well, if you're drifting, eventually you're going to find yourself in a more tempting, difficult, precarious situation.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, though. I think sometimes, at least in our pastoral experience, sometimes the way that a woman gets sort of sucked into an emotional affair is she meets a man who's in a crisis or a difficult season or a hardship, and she's a caregiver. And so she's trying to help, but next thing you know, she's like, oh my gosh, I'm emotionally
I was trying to help that way.
All right, like, oh, because then the guy's like, oh, we're emotionally connected and she's cute. We're halfway there. So even when you're dealing with hurting people or people in crisis, but for a man and a woman, I guess a man could be a caregiver. But oftentimes it's a woman that is more naturally inclined with the nurturing instincts toward caregiver role. How dangerous is that if you see a guy and he's in a hard season and your heart goes out to him? You're like, oh, I'll help him. He's a single dad. I'll go clean his home. Or, he's in the middle of a divorce and I'll watch his kids. Or, he's struggling with his health. And so, I'm going to do a lot of research to help him figure it out and maybe start caring for his health and giving him recommendations. Like all of those may initially be, I'm just trying to help.
Right.
But eventually it leads to great danger and harm.
For sure. Yeah. And I was naive when I was little. I didn't get into that situation with a man, but, and I think because I am more of a caregiver, but I think through the years, just watching and having my own convictions now and moving out of those naive teenage years, I think, I can see when those situations come, you can give resources or, go to real men, go to church, there's all these men, have a man reach out to them. It's not that you can't help. It's just that if you get yourself into an emotional connection with that person, that's very dangerous and it's a slippery slope. And so it's not that caregivers can't help a guy, but they do need to just offer resources through another man or your church or something like that. And that's where women can get caught off guard sometimes, like, oh, well, I didn't mean that. Because I think guys can be caregivers, but oftentimes it's with a different motive.
Well, and I'll close with this. What comes time for me is, like many men, I'm a protector provider. Mm-hmm. And so if there is a woman and, her boyfriend or husband is dangerous or violent, if she's got kids, she's a single mom, she needs finances or car or groceries, like my first instinct is always like protect and provide for women and children. That's just my default, which, could be a father's heart or a pastor's heart, but could get you in a really bad situation.
Absolutely.
Like, oh, well, let me get between you and the bad guy. Well, then now am I the new guy? Like, I can't be in that. Or providing, next thing you know, like you're doing what a husband would do, and that's feeding the family. And so even if you're going to do that, maybe, this is the way we've done it. Like if it's a single mom that has a need, like we will give through you. You'll talk to them, give them a car, give them groceries. Like we like being generous, but it's not just me showing up and then giving, and then there's emotion and then there's a hug. And it's like, I just don't need to be here. And if it's protection, a dangerous situation, like this is where you get lawyers and you get police and maybe get her dad involved and, activate the men that it is their responsibility, or the church steps in. So, sometimes you end up as a Christian in an emotionally unhealthy relationship that could be constituted as an affair. And at the beginning, the intent was not malice. It was naivety that led to temptation.
Yes. Yep. We have to safeguard against it.
Yeah. And so at the end of the day, safeguard your marriage. And if there's anybody in your life that either your spouse doesn't know about, or there's information that you withhold about that relationship from your spouse, that should be an indicator that you're in a dangerous place.
Yeah.
Okay. Next episode, we're going to deal with what are the contributing factors to an emotional or physical affair, and how do you use those to safeguard yourself and your marriage against that fate.